policy that aims to reduce the degree of inequality of income will also reduce the level of employment in a country. What is most likely to be such a policy? So this question is basically asking us what is this policy, and it has given us two pieces of information about it. The first one being that it reduces the degree of inequality of income, which also means that equality of income has increased, and that it also reduces the level of employment in a country. So first of all, let's just look at our options. The first one says that the effective minimum wage has increased by 25%. Alright, what is an effective minimum wage? Well, an effective minimum wage can be shown on the labor market diagram, which is very similar to a demand and supply diagram. So the labor market, right? It's similar to a demand and supply diagram, except on the y-axis, instead of price, we have the wage rate, or the wage level, and on the x-axis we have the quantity of labor. And this is basically a demand and supply diagram that represents the market of labor. So yeah, it's pretty similar. So downwards is D, upwards is S, and of course we have our equilibrium wage rate and our equilibrium quantity of labor. So WE and QE, right? So, what is a minimum wage? Well, a minimum wage intends to increase the equilibrium wage or the average wage rate, right? So that people with lower incomes will receive higher incomes. So, now, to make sure that it's effective, right, we will want our wage, this minimum wage to be like greater than our wage rate, our equilibrium wage rate. So that means to make sure that it's greater than it, it's more than it, that lower incomes, people who are earning lower incomes will get an increased wage. This minimum wage will have to be placed above the equilibrium wage, right? Wage rate. So it'll be right here. Now, all right, that's if it's effective, okay? So, okay, what happens if we put it down here? Oh goodness, I thought that was a straight line. What if we put it down here? What happens then? Well, you see, since the minimum wage kind of acts like a wage floor, like this is where wages must start from, the value of wages must start from, it means that the wage can only like start increasing from that point. So if the minimum wage were like under the equilibrium wage rate, then it would start increasing from here. So honestly, that doesn't really give much of an effect because then it'll just return to this spot. However, if it's above the equilibrium wage rate, then wages will have to start from this point. It will start increasing from this point, which is, so however much it increases, it will always be greater than the equilibrium wage rate, the original one. So that means that lower income people who were originally earning this amount of income will definitely get an increase in their incomes. All right? So what this says is that the effective minimum wage has increased by 25%. And you know what? This value doesn't exactly matter because we know it increases, right? So that's all that matters. So the minimum wage increases. So that means that lower income people who are earning at the equilibrium wage will have an even higher increase in their incomes. So that's good, right? Because those with lower income earners will earn greater incomes, whereas the higher income earners are not being affected in this case. So that means that those with lower incomes might be able to match up with those with higher incomes, but basically it means that equality of income has increased. So you know what, that actually ties to this fact, this characteristic, you would say, reduce the degree of inequality of income. Yes, that's true, right? So now, interestingly, if you look at the minimum wage on this labor market, you'll see that because if it's placed above the wage equilibrium, the lines aren't exactly intersecting. So the quantity supplied and quantity demanded of labor are different. So it's not really touching, but it's not really touching, but the quantity supplied of labor is here, and the quantity demanded of labor is here. So that's QS and QD. So why is this interesting? Well, you see, at this original equilibrium wage rate, right, we have this equilibrium quantity of labor. And because that is where the supply curve and demand curve of labor intersects, that is the amount of being employed that is the amount of people employed because the demand and the supply matches up. So those who demand labor will probably be employers and private firms, and those who supply labor are basically the people who are labor themselves. Well, if it's not at this equilibrium wage rate and it's at this minimum wage rate, the quantity supplied of labor is greater than quantity demanded of labor. That is because, well, if the minimum wage increases and if like the lowest income you can get basically increases, more people are attracted to work or to get like to be paid. So more people would enter the workforce, hence an increase in quantity supplied of labor. However, if the minimum wage rate increases, then firms and employers will be less attracted or interested in hiring people because higher minimum wage means higher wage basically, and higher wage means increased production costs, and that will decrease their ability to supply the good because, well, it's become more expensive to produce it. Labor is more expensive, then these employers might turn to using capital or machinery instead. So the demand for labor will decrease, hence this gap. So one important fact about this gap is that this amount right here will basically be basically the quantity demanded for labor, the amount that firms are willing to hire and pay for. This amount, this line only. So the rest who enter the workforce are unemployed, sadly, because the firms only want this much. So starting from this cutoff point, no one is employed, although they want to be, they want to get a job, they can't really get employed. So this surplus represents unemployment, right? So if you compare it to the equilibrium wage rate and the equilibrium quantity of labor, you can say there originally was no unemployment, right? But now that we have a minimum wage up here, this gap, the unemployment, like the number of people who are unemployed has increased. So does it reduce the level of employment in the country? Yes. So this fact also checks out because if the level of unemployment has increased, that means that the level of employment has decreased, right? So these two facts actually check out. So you know what? We're gonna keep this in mind, and this is most likely the answer. So I'll just erase this now, and we'll look at the other options, all right? Now the second one says, the rate of income tax paid by the lowest band of earners is reduced. So income tax is a tax on income, right? So the greater the income tax, the less the disposable income. So when it says that the rate of income tax paid by the lowest band of earners is reduced, it basically means, well, let's say we have people with low incomes, then people who have like mid-tier incomes, then people with high incomes. So of course, each of them will have a certain rate of tax. Let's say the low-income people has 2%, and let's say this one has 5%, and this one has 10%, right? So it's a progressive taxation system. But anyway, if the rate of income tax paid by the lowest band of earners is reduced, let's say from 2 to 0.5%, then that means that the lowest band of earners will have greater disposable income, because, well, less of their income is being taken as tax. So does this reduce the degree of inequality? Yes, because it increases equality by giving more purchasing power to the lowest earners. However, does it reduce the level of employment? Well, you can't really link it to employment here. It doesn't, honestly, doesn't specifically tie to employment in any way. So it can't be that, honestly. Oh goodness. So the third option says that the government increases the level of subsidies given to producers of some merit goods. So merit goods are goods that are more beneficial to consumers than they realize. So alright, subsidies, right? So subsidies are usually, you can like show the effect of subsidies on a demand and supply diagram. So let's just draw that real quick. So downwards is D, upwards is S. And then you have your price and your quantity. So if the government increases the level of subsidies to merit goods, so this is a merit good, increases the level of subsidies, right? So subsidies are basically a grant to producers. So basically the government would pay firms to produce more of this merit good. So if the government literally pays them subsidies, that means that the cost of production will fall because the government's kind of paying for it, which means that the supply curve will shift to the right because it's cheaper to produce more. So of course producers will produce more because it's cheaper now. So what's the effect of this? The effect is that the price of merit goods will decrease. So you know what, that makes it more affordable to consumers to buy merit goods. So does it reduce the degree of inequality of income? Well, although it is cheaper to buy a merit good, it only affects merit goods and it doesn't exactly affect income. So it doesn't really directly link to equality of income, and it doesn't really mention or talk about employment at all. So I think it's pretty unrelated. It can't be that. It's not exactly related to the question or the information given. So now the last one. The government provides more goods that are regarded as essential. So this is direct government provision. All right, the government gives you more free stuff that is essential to your life, like maybe food, clothes. So does that reduce the degree of inequality of income? It might reduce poverty, but it doesn't explicitly increase your income. It only gives you stuff, not income or wage. Does it reduce the level of employment in the country? It's not directly tied to that. It's not too specific enough for that. So we'll just go with A, and that is also the correct answer.